This is the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game.
Rule number one is you have to believe in yourself. You're the only one who doesn't think you belong in this appointment. The prospect has already validated your existence by scheduling time with you. Get it through your head you belong here, go in there, crush it, and close the deal.
A place where sales professionals can come to learn from other sales professionals and thought leaders that have mastered their craft.
The difference between a good salesperson and a best-in-class salesperson is only 2 minutes. By spending an extra 2 minutes on what you might think is a mundane task in the sales game, you separate yourselves from the pack, you grow your book of business, you close more deals, and you retain your accounts.
As well as their peers who are still striving for perfection to achieve their why.
I have a wife and 4 kids. Failure is not an option.
Real sales professionals, real stories, real results. Are you ready to feel the power?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. Today, we have got a really outside-the-box guest for you guys, and it is going to be a good one. We have Mr. Mark Suski from Jensen Hughes here to talk to us about risk engineering. Mark, what's going on, man?
Not much. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you
Loud and
okay.
clear.
And
All right.
truthfully, if just to give you some housekeeping, if you need to, minimize your screen and use it for your notes. We can see you fine whether you have it maximized on your screen or not.
All right, outstanding.
Good deal. So before we get into risk engineering, tell us a little bit about Mark and how you got into risk engineering.
Well, Mark Suski, I currently work for a company called Jensen Hughes. I've been with them for a little over 15 years. And we're primarily a fire protection, engineering, life safety type company. And, prior to my joining Jensen Hughes, I worked for a company called Aon Fire Protection Engineering that had a subsidiary company that was Aon Property Risk Consulting. And so, pardon me, so we worked very closely with them, helping out property risk and helping out, the engineering side. So it was a really good mix and a good, combination of the engineering side of the house, which I traditionally had been working for, and then working with the, the property risk consulting people, showed both aspects and kind of welded them together, to come across with this, fire protection engineering and, risk engineering type philosophy, job.
I'll tell you what, man, another really good segment of Aon that's out there is their forensic accounting department too. And specific to property losses and cat losses, I've actually engaged those guys to be on my client's side of the table as forensic accountants to help resolve business income claims. So I'm pumped about listening to you talk about all the stuff that you guys are doing, because I've actually have firsthand experience with, number one, why risk engineering is important on the front end of the claim, but also number two, how it makes it easier to get through a claim if you've got risk engineering reports and other things from before it ever happened to fall back on. So before we get into practical stuff, why don't, in terms of examples and things, talk a little bit about when we say risk engineering, what are we even talking about?
So getting into the topic, I just first want to make it clear that this is, just kind of scratches the surface of what risk engineering is all about. And, as Jensen Hughes, all the services that we provide in this arena, there are certain, topics that we're going to talk about and kind of scratch the surface in that we could, in reality, spend an hour just on, one of those topics. So this is just going to be very high level. It's going to scratch the surface. Brief explanation of what, risk engineering entails. First of all, I want to, first and foremost, make it clear, safety and protection of human life is always on the top of the list. That's always going to be the first question, the first, box that we're going to check is going to be, life safety, and protection of people. So getting, taking that then one step further, once we know we have that accomplished, the risk engineering is identifying, potential risks and how to mitigate those potential outcomes of a bad event. The insurance industry uses risk engineering to help companies of all sizes, build an infrastructure that's resilient and help them manage loss control. They help mitigate the risk, improve safety, and, in the insurance industry, obviously, to reduce claims. That's the ultimate goal. And, kind of a simple example of what we do with the risk engineering, there's a couple of simple examples. One is designing a car. Over the years, automotive manufacturers, they could create a car that, that if once you jumped in and drove down the road, you'd, never have a problem with, but that would basically like be driving a battle tank down the road. It's not practical. It's not cost effective. So over the years, we, as drivers, we realize there is always an inherent risk in driving. Every time we jump into an automobile, we risk, we assume that there's an inherent risk.
Sure.
Yeah. Stop me if I talk too fast, if you have a question, comment. But, over the years, we have all of the, safety features that are being installed in these cars, all-wheel drive, lane assist, blind spot monitoring, all of those things are helping us mitigate that risk of an accident or a problem while we're driving our car. Mm-hmm. So, those are, some of the, it's kind of, it in a nutshell. The other, aspect of risk engineering, when we're looking at modern industrial processes, that use dangerous chemicals, or even during the process of making a product, there's potential for a problem. For example, cornstarch and sugar products. Everybody uses cornstarch in just about everything, and sugar products obviously are out there. However, during the processing of these foods and these items, there's always a significant, for example, with the cornstarch, there's a dust hazard and a potential for a deflagration. Those are very real threats while we're making a very innocuous type product like cornstarch. And over the years, we've, engineers have, picked up the mantle and have created processes and create, blowout panels, extinguishing systems, detection systems, and, suppression systems to help mitigate, those hazards, during our process, during the process of manufacturing. So those are just a couple. Obviously there's a lot more than just those two, but those are just a few that come to mind when we talk about how we take risk engineering, what it is, and how we take it and to apply it to a daily life.
So that's a very actionable thing that you're doing, and it's actually, to be honest with you, a little deeper, even at surface level, as you were very clear to point out, than what I would have thought it was. So to me, in my experience, risk engineering is a couple of guys that are XFM Global engineers show up to a property. They look at everything that could go on with that property, determine a PML for the property, probable maximum loss, look at the construction and all of the other things that go into it, and I get like a 50-page report of information on that property that is way more than I ever would have dreamt could be available on it. Yeah. And quite honestly, more than probably what I need, but underwriters absolutely love it. But you're actually taking this in risk engineering processes in addition to tangible property.
Yeah, we can actually, further down as we talk, there's other, real life tools that we use to mitigate these risks, because, we look at, in the fire protection and life safety industry, obviously, as I said before, life safety is paramount. And in these real world, chemical processes, all of the simple things is, the dust hazard, as we talked about, other chemical processes, manufacturing, oil or crude, gasoline processes and things like that. There are real life hazards that exist during making these products that we need on a daily life. And without, people stepping in and creating these, analyzing what the risk is and then creating solutions to those risks, we would be back, 200 years ago, or we just, 100 years ago when manufacturing started and people didn't really care and we just built stuff and plants exploded, and hey, that's what happens every now and again. And, so anyways.
Right. So we've talked over the past year, David and I on the podcast about how COVID has impacted us and our agency specifically. What's the impact been in your world?
Yeah, COVID is definitely shaping some things right now. I mean, it's somewhat early on in the first year, and these life safety type systems and codes that need to be changed and things don't change rapidly. But For example, now with social distancing, everybody's social distancing, places are opening up at 50% capacity, 25% capacity. So we have these items being introduced, currently. There's, the water cooler talk. And like I said, this is nothing that's definitive or anything that's been written in a code right now. But, the water cooler talk is, okay, what's going to happen 6 months, a year from now? Are we going to take this social distancing and say that, at a life safety issue, we have an occupant load, as an engineer and architects figure out occupancy loads, are we then going to say and go backwards and say, okay, if we could have put 100 people in this space prior, are we now only going to put 50? Are we going to put 75? So those are real arguments that are kind of going on, within the industry. Another one is a topic of HVAC systems. Do we, the mechanical code requires so many air changes and so much fresh air to be introduced into the system. Are we now going to make those more stringent? Are we going to look for a higher grade HEPA type filtration system that is going to work much better? Are we going to do more air changes, more additional air? So those are two of the really big changes that are going on right now. And, nobody really knows what the final answer is going to be. Somewhat like happened after 9/11, significant, people were proposing very significant code changes, across the board for how we're building buildings and how people are moving around buildings, but then eventually, the industry realized how rare of an event that was, and cooler heads came about, and they said, okay, we don't need to make significant changes to the code, but they did tweak some codes around the edges, and they did tweak some codes to accommodate some more stuff. So I would assume that something very similar would happen with the COVID. How they're going to change it and what they're going to end up doing. And, one aspect that has been changed, which actually I took part in, which was, kind of weird, not weird, but different, was I was one of my clients we do site surveys for. So the client calls us up, we go in, we do site surveys, we look at primarily my job was looking at the fire protection systems, the sprinkler systems, the fire alarm systems, and those kind of things, and looking at it and verifying that, yes, the system has been installed per the contract documents, per code. And what we do is then we sign off on it, and helps them minimize their risk, knowing that they have fully functional and fully functioning fire alarm and sprinkler systems. The survey was actually done virtually. We completed it virtually, where somebody had walked around with a camera, a webcam, and it was a two-way real-time conversation. And they walked around with a camera and looked at everything up and down, and you're like, hey, stop here, look at that pipe, look at that pipe, look at this, look at that. And you walked around the site, virtually, to keep as many people away from the site as possible. So that's one of the things that, I think that one is going to stick around for a while, because when companies look at not only, cost wise, I think it helps bring down costs, but it helps, maintain. And I think it's only going to get better and refined.
Well, I mean, the other thing is we're automatically prepared for the next thing, right? I mean, the flu has been around forever. And I think the most risk mitigation that's happened around the flu is people putting up a sign in the break room or around the sink in the bathroom saying it's flu season. Make sure you wash your hands.
Yeah, exactly.
And
in your elbow.
Now they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, this is a little bit, I don't necessarily know if more contagious is the right word, but it's certainly more prevalent. It's at the front of everybody's head. Right. It's probably time to look at that. And you're going to pull, I think that there's a lot of times when you look to use risk engineering, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, but when you use risk engineering thinking you're looking for one thing as a result, you actually have the ability to identify other things in your process that you probably didn't even realize existed.
Oh, correct. I mean, and that's why when you're evaluating something from start to finish, there's a process that we can talk later on into the podcast, called process safety management, where you're actually starting from the very first part of that process to the end process. And then it's a step by step where you're walking through that and say, where is my problem? What's my linchpin? Where's my most dangerous point of this whole entire process going to be? And what mitigation, can I use to solve those problems, so.
Well, I can tell you probably one of the craziest surprises that I've ever had was having somebody come in to do a facilities risk engineering visit on a commercial bakery that I represented, and it was new construction, and they were really just getting ready to ramp up and take everything live. The building plans had been stamped by an engineer. They were signed off on by the fire marshal. And when we walked into the 20,000 square foot walk-in Sub-Zero freezer, they had a wet pipe sprinkler system in the ceiling.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah, nobody was
Awesome.
actually paying attention. Nobody was really paying that close attention.
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself,
20,000 square foot walk-in Sub-Zero.
It's $100 million a year manufacturing facility, man.
Still, that's crazy.
Their pallets,
just to even think
their
about
pallets have pallets in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's nuts. But to that end, I mean, who's your ideal client? Who are the people that typically reach out to you and hire you to go in and risk engineer? Is it do you do things with agents and agencies that have high dollar accounts and they want to differentiate themselves in the marketplace, so they're willing to foot the bill for you guys to come in? Is it more on the carrier side? Is it expert witness stuff? Is it all of the above?
It's actually kind of a combination of all of the above. In reality, a lot of times it's, we have several, property risk consultant companies that we work with. And, a lot of times they'll call us up and they'll have a client, or they'll have a hazard analysis that needs to be completed, or they'll have a process that they want looked at, or something along that line. So it could be the, the property risk consultant that's bringing us to the table that's going to be hired to the end user. And the end user is going to, eventually going to foot the bill, or, sometimes depending upon the insurance, the policy, who actually, foots the bill, that's always worked out in the wash. But, it could be directly from it also could be directly from the, client themselves. Sometimes an AHJ will walk in and see something kind of weird and say, that doesn't look familiar to me. You need to show me how that's going to be safe, particularly if you're in a city, and the city doesn't, the fire department doesn't have, the knowledge of, how to properly store maybe volatile chemicals, or, things along that line. So they'll ask us, okay, come in, evaluate this. We create a report, we give it to the city, those kind of things that those are the type of reasons why we're hired, the majority of the time, so.
Well, I can tell you from somebody who is used in being completely transparent. You and I met because of Steve Dines, and I had a relationship with Steve at his predecessor organization. So I didn't even know about Jensen Hughes. I've used similar services in the past, and why guys like you and companies like Jensen Hughes are important to people who do what we do. Our audience, a good bit of them are going after middle market business. And, part of the issue, Mark, is that the property insurance transaction is commoditized. It's very, very difficult. I stray personally away. I have a lot of people that I know that have been very successful writing, large property schedules in coastal communities and all of that other stuff. But at the end of the day, to the naked eye, it boils down to one thing, and that's premium all the time. And it's very, very difficult in a commoditized segment of our business to drive value. But what I can tell you is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, for everybody listening to this, if you've never been through a risk engineering exercise, whether it be property, and I mean, I'm actually ecstatic to know that you guys do other things in terms of looking at manufacturing processes and things like that. I wish I would have known you when I had the latex guy in Indonesia that I represented. Yeah. That would have been a fun one to risk engineer for all kinds of reasons. But you guys really bring something to the table that if I have a large account that's got some property exposure that I may have some questions on, I'm probably going to invest in having a risk engineering audit done as part of my point of sale presentation, because I really feel like it stacks the deck in my favor and gives the buyer a message that they're not used to hearing at that price point.
Yeah, and there's a lot of there's a lot of significant services that we can provide even during that process. Obviously, like you said, insurance now is commoditized. You're looking at, okay, where can I get my best premiums for the least amount of money? And the end client wants the same thing. They want the most coverage for the least amount of money. So as risk engineers, for example, you call us and said, let's take a look at this property and do a risk engineering or risk analysis of this property. We come in, we evaluate some of those items, for a traditional warehouse. For example, I'll just throw out that freezer that you earlier talked about, that Sub-Zero freezer. If that's an existing freezer up and running, that's the things that we would look at. We would, evaluate the sprinkler system, evaluate your, fire alarm protection system, evaluate those types of life safety systems so that you can go back saying, okay, we're going to have protection here, and we've got very good protection, so maybe we can dial back the overheads or the premiums a little bit. For large industrial processes, we have software where we can do hazardous release modeling. We can actually we can model vapor cloud generation and dispersion. If you're a company that deals a lot with chemicals and toxic release impact and thermal blast and all of those type of things that would help you in the process of, okay, how do I insure this client, and how do I ensure that we're giving them a proper insurance, but and then it also helps the end user know that they're going to get what they need, but not more than what they need to get.
Right, and I think the point, from my perspective is this, if I've got a client who's got a significant total insurable value at one of their locations, and it doesn't seem like the underwriter quite gets it. By the way, I'm going to put a disclaimer on this next comment. I have no knowledge whatsoever of what Jensen Hughes' pricing is. I'm using this strictly because I'm not as smart as Mark, and I got to keep the math easy. So let's just say I pay you guys $10,000 to come in and do an assessment of a single location for me. And as a result of that, I save my client $20,000 or $25,000. Do you think my client is going to have a problem writing a check to reimburse me for that
Putting
cost?
the bill for that?
I mean, and that's the way the way we want people in our audience to be thinking. We always, and I'm guilty of this, I make the comment all the time. I did it on the podcast 5 minutes ago. Property's commoditized. I don't want to play in that game. But the fact of the matter is, if you're creative and if you have the right connections and you understand all of the things that can happen, you can start figuring out ways to drive value in terms of value-added services on the property side of things too. And, I'm not even going down the road of the things you can see not only for safety, but even I would imagine that you can pick up, and I don't want to speak for you, I imagine you pick up the ability to identify things that might not be as efficient as they could be in the process, and has the ability to enhance profitability, which is an added bonus. And so what I would question anybody listening to this, wondering why I am an advocate for having risk engineering done, which one of your clients is going to tell you that it's a bad idea to offer them suggestions to improve efficiency and ultimately their profitability by bringing a subject matter expert in? The answer is as ludicrous as the question is.
Yeah, the other aspect on that, there's another topic we haven't even scratched the surface on either. It's once you perform these risk engineering services and you identify these risks, now we start talking about, we start talking about BI and we start talking about MFLs. And if we can help decrease your, your business interruption or your maximal foreseeable losses by implementing a couple of different programs, or maybe putting in some systems that may have a upfront cost but a long-term benefit, we also help clients say, you have and I'm just throwing these numbers out there too. I'll be upfront with you, David. So as we're throwing numbers out, if you have a budget for safety for $1 million a year, we perform some risk analysis. We do a PSM, we do a process safety management survey of your site. And we come back and we look at it and say, these are where your exact hazards are. And this is where you would best spend your money if you only have that $1 million. Wouldn't it be a lot smarter to take that $1 million and spend it a lot smarter and, basically target it towards the actual risks, instead of just saying, wow, here's what we used to do in the past. Here's how we do it here. Here's how we do it there. And just have this wide and broad, scope. take that money and use it smarter. Use it, make it work for you, and have those targeted risks identified. Have those programs put in place. Have those suppression systems or those detection systems, finalized. So you're actually using your money smart, thereby decreasing your business interruption potential and maybe your maximal foreseeable losses.
Well, yeah, and I mean, this goes back to the things they talk about when I was, when you go through risk financing, as I was getting into my CRM designation, people, the more sophisticated the buyer. If you're looking at Marsh and Willis and Aon and the companies, the absolute whales, the national accounts, worldwide accounts that they go after, this is how they approach it. Here's a fun fact. It's also why these companies are wildly successful that they represent. And anything that's done in terms of an investment in these companies, you can be sure the bean counters are running internal rate of return calculations on everything, so they know the payback period for whatever investment it is that they make. And that could come in increased efficiency. It could come through reduced premiums. It could come through a decrease of retained losses that were inside of a deductible layer that were all out of pocket and are now gone. And I mean, I can go on for days giving you examples, but I mean, it's huge. And as hard as it is to get your head around some of this, Mark's doing a really good job of giving you practical things that he's seen or that his company does. And I'm really hoping that the wheels are spinning a little bit and you're thinking about that one account you lost because you didn't have something. You didn't have something that you could use. Now, we talk about it in the workers' comp side. We can go in, we can do experience modification factor analysis using Magic. We can go in and we can work on human resources issues and safety issues by putting a learning management system in with Think HR, or giving them the HR hotline so that things can be handled immediately. We talk about setting up nurse triage for workers' comp claims to try and keep them at medical only or first aid basis and cutting down the indemnity portion of the claim and ultimately costing the client more money. What we're doing is we're showing you that exact same risk management thought process does translate to the most commoditized portion of insurance that we have, and that's the property piece. So that's really good stuff, man. Talk a little bit. I mean, when we were going back and forth about how this conversation was going to be structured, you had mentioned case studies. Maybe a couple of case studies of some things you've done. You've given some good examples already. I hope you didn't spend them all.
No,
because I'm going to ask you to maybe share a couple good ones now. But I mean,
would have to imagine there's some more.
There are.
Yeah, well, I mean, what would you say the best? Yeah, what would you say the best one is? The biggest win you've ever had as a result of performing a risk engineering study.
Well, personally, like I said, there's a lot of other people in the company at Jensen Hughes that performs risk engineering, and what I'm talking about today is literally the tip of the iceberg of risk engineering. Everything, like I said, from industrial processes. We'll talk a little bit more about dust here in a little minute. Dust management and dust hazard analysis is huge, and going on. But these are just a few of my favorites that I've been involved with over the years. So one of my favorites was a client we had, and they actually were building a brand new ammonia plant. They needed large quantities of ammonia in their facility. So they built the building just to house this large quantities of ammonia and the pumps that they needed to get it out to the specific areas of this process. Well, adjacent to this large ammonia building was also another high hazard building that the company had. So they were very curious on what would happen if, God forbid, if I actually had a problem in this ammonia building and I had a deflagration, what would actually happen not only to my building, but also what would happen to this high hazard building that was adjacent to it. And I think it was a maximum, I want to say, of 47 feet away. What would happen to that building? And, conversely, on the other side, if I had a emergency or something happen in my high hazard building, what would happen to my ammonia building? What would happen to these two? We looked at it. We took a look at it using some of the software that's out there. There's actually, a lot of different software where, we can kind of incorporate to determine, like we talked about before, chemical release, vapor clouds, those, flammable gas clouds, and, blevies and jet fires and pool fires. So we used one of the programs to determine what a ammonia leak inside this building would look like. So we calculated the amount of ammonia it would take to have a deflagration inside of the building. Then we equated that energy that the deflagration would cause to what would it do to my structure. So, okay, now I know what it's going to do to my structure. What is it going to do to the building adjacent to me or adjacent to this building? And, when you're evaluating all of these items, using the software, we looked at the forces that were generated by a deflagration. And then we actually worked with, and we could see what would have happened if the building was built. They had it said, we're going to put the building, here's how it's going to be steel, structured, I-beams, how they structured and said, here's what it's going to look like. Their proposed building looked at it, the forces generated during this deflagration and what it would do to the adjacent building. Then we tweaked, and we actually worked with, and some of the structural engineers here worked with the client to build that building stronger so that if a deflagration inside of there did happen, it would not be a problem to adjacent buildings. And then it also...
Mark, what the hell is a deflagration? I have no idea.
Kyle's been dying. He doesn't know what.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's explosion. Yeah, deflagration, explosion.
Is it
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. It's fire engineering geek speak, I guess, is the best term for it. It's one of those terms that we throw around to show everybody how smart we are. Like
there we go. Hey, I am going to say it at least 5 times when I leave today just to get it into the vernacular.
Yeah. So going back to this explosion that we're modeling, so we took a look at it, and actually it was very forward thinking on our clients, our client that ultimately wanted us to do this, because they wanted to know A, what would happen to this structure, and B, what would happen to the adjacent structure. So they were just looking at this holistically. When you think about it, this risk engineering kind of does look at everything holistically, because A, they wanted to know what would happen to my building, my structure, the people, and B, what would happen to my building, my structure, and my manufacturing processes. So they were looking at this as more of a holistic point of, am I going to leave, if I do have a explosion in this new ammonia building, am I going to cause a catastrophic chain event, which could then take out this adjacent building, which then at the end of this process, I'm just going to have a big, large crater in the ground, and then everybody around is going to have a very bad day. So it was actually a very neat project. Like I said, it was, when we did our studies, when we looked at the ammonia release using some of the computer programs, calculating the release energy of a ammonia explosion, we worked very closely with some of the structural people to help them, create that better, stronger building, put in, blast panels and things like that would allow, venting and, the structure to maintain intact. So that was actually a very fun project. And it, like I said, it helped everybody all the way around. It helped life safety. It helped their long-term business model. It helped everything. And it was just one piece of that big puzzle.
How long does something like that take? Like, what's that process look like? I mean, that seems like a little bit bigger of a assessment, but I mean, what's
the actual computer programming? And it's actually not that. Once you have the building structure and once you have the quantity of ammonia, and you calculate all of those, how much release, what do I need to, what's the mix I need to actually create an explosion, what does a vapor cloud in there look like as it moves around? This stuff is all entered into a computer program, and it's done in something like that. We usually say 4 to 6 weeks. This one took a little longer because we did actually work with the client, and we actually worked with them to try. Once the initial study was completed, where we had the explosive energy that this ammonia explosion would generate, then we could help, and we looked at it, and structural engineers kind of picked up the mantle and created that building so the building wouldn't come down. We could take, if we did have some sort of explosion in the space, we put in blast panels to help channel the pressure and the venting to a different area away from the other building and things like that. So that one went for like 3 or 4 months. But to do an initial impact study, we always tell people 4 to 6 weeks, depending upon, the information that we're given. Sometimes we may need more, and it depends upon how quickly clients can get us all the information we need.
I'm probably late asking this
Gotcha.
question, but you've mentioned a couple of times about how this is just the tip of the iceberg, and that there are people at Jensen Hughes that can do all kinds of stuff. What's your specific specialty?
What I do?
Yeah, well, I mean, what would you say? Are you specialized, or are you general in what you do?
I'm more general in what I do. I have a few specialties. My specialties is when I first got out of college, I actually worked for a company called Fenwal, and we did explosion. So when we start talking about explosions in, like dust collectors, explosion protection in explosion systems, that's where if you're looking at this risk analysis, where I would fall in on. And that's why I know a little bit more about the dust hazard analysis, and going back to that initial comment of how people don't understand or don't realize the explosive nature of a lot of the different products that they use on a daily basis. When I first got out of college, learning that going to grain elevators in corn and protecting aerosol films and dust collectors for grain elevators, not for grain elevators, but dust collectors for, different type of processes for tissue making, for paper making, wood making, and, coal processes. And so that's where I would fall back on if you're going to ask me where my level of expertise would be, in this risk.
At one point in time in my book of business, I had a company that packaged aerosols, a millwork company, that latex manufacturer in Indonesia, and there was another one that was, as you were saying, that I'm like, holy cow, I needed this guy on every single one of those.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's crazy. So here's my question to you. You're obviously very, very specialized. Poor Kyle didn't even know what defecation meant. I mean, I'm not going to tell you one way or the other if I did or not. I mean,
What was it called? What was it called?
What is deflagration?
Deflagration?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. What is it? Deflagration, cation.
That's one, like I said,
Defecation
that's
is
one
what
of
you
those
did
words
this
I
morning
can
in
throw
the
out there to
whatever.
show everybody how smart we are. They taught me it in college, so I need to use it.
Yeah, so that's all right. You're good. But I mean, the people listening to
Yeah,
this,
David, I don't know on
I
your
can
end,
tell
but
you.
I'm having it
I'm gonna
really
go ahead
broken
and
up
go
on
out on a
my
limb.
end.
Okay, I think it may be your internet based on the video. We'll try and fight through because it seems like it's been coming in and out. But you're high level, man. The people listening to this podcast are not high level. There are things that they need to be able to recognize to know that they need you. So if you dial it back to coming right out of college and think about, well, not even then really, because you were special, you were educated in this. Pretend like we're all completely ignorant to all of this. What would be some low-hanging fruit that you would tell the people in our audience they could be looking at when they go into their clients' and prospects' facilities that they should be looking at to keep problematic things from happening, or to at least identify and know, I need to get somebody in here to risk engineer this thing?
Yeah, I think I understand the question. I don't know if it's the internet connection or what's happening here, but I'm kind of broken up right now, and give some general and broad advice to the audience out there if they're looking at what some of the things and some of the easy steps that they can take to start engaging some of these risk engineering type philosophies.
Well, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. If I go into, I have feed manufacturers that I represent. If I go into a feed mill and there's 3 inches of dust on top of the steel beams that are running across the top of the building, I know we have a problem with cleanliness in the building and dust collection. Okay. If I go into a millwork facility and they have a dust collection system and yet there's dust everywhere as if it's non-functioning, these are easy things that I should see. But the people who are insurance salespeople that are just used to slinging a policy, they very rarely even say, "Can I go take a tour of your facility before we leave?" I want them to see these are some things that I do have the ability to recognize. I may not know how to fix it, but I want to recognize it. And I know that if I do, I can get a hold of Mark and the people at Jensen Hughes and say, look, guys, here's what I've got. Here's a couple of pictures of some things that looked a little wonky to me. So what are like maybe the top 3 things that anybody should be able to recognize that could be messed up in one of these places that they go into that you see more than anything
Well, a
else?
lot of times, as a greater big picture, it's just realizing the systems that are there to protect. One of the big things is, for a facility. So if we're looking at just a facility in general, is my sprinkler system active? I will not tell you how many times I've walked into a facility and how many times we as, fire protection people go into a facility and find out that part of their sprinkler system was turned off. The sprinkler control valves were closed. Even under fire investigations, people will find out that, oh yeah, last week we shut off this large section of the sprinkler system to do some work over there, and somebody forgot to turn it on. Just big things like, that is one of the big ticket items, just ensuring that the systems that are there to protect the processes in the building are actually up and functioning. That is key. Is the fire alarm system actually functioning, or did they have so many problems with it they just shut it off? Our gate valves that are supposed to be open or closed during your process, are all of the right ones in place as you're walking through a process and you're just looking around. I mean, if we're talking from a ground level, those are really the big key items that are easy, extremely low hanging, and most people understand when I turn my sprinkler system off, bad things can potentially happen.
Yeah. Well, hey, here's a fun fact, man. 2 of the 3 things that you just said have endorsements on insurance policy that clearly say alarm must be in working order. Sprinkler, you're warranting that your sprinklers are in working order. So the one that gets screwed in the process is the insured, because they made the decision not realizing that they had no coverage or reduced coverage in the event that they made the decision to do what they did. So that's actually really good information. In one, those are some things that I've dealt with over the course of my career. Talk for just a second. I mean, we've mentioned it a couple times. You actually had it in here as in the bullets we shared back and forth about.
So
I don't think people understand exactly how dangerous.
Dust is actually a very big problem, and in fact, OSHA has an NEP, a National Emphasis Program on dust. They've had it in place for a while, and it's one of those things that people don't understand, particularly now, even with metal dust. We're having a lot of problems with 3D printer dust. All of these, now that we're going from these small 3D printers to these large 3D printers. And, we're looking at, in the different manufacturing automotive industries, looking at how are we collecting our dust. And years ago, we were just basically, the dust was extracted from whatever process you're working with. And it was, conveyed through ductwork into a collector. That collector, depending upon what kind it is, if it's going through filters, drop box, volume, increase type of thing, where then we're collecting all of the solid material and taking it away. Well, over the last decade now, over the last couple of decades, actually, it's gotten a lot more sophisticated. So if clients out there, if people out there do have dust, we do this, at Jensen Hughes, we do it on a regular basis. When you have these processes that do generate it, the dust is supposed to be sent in to be tested, and there's a method to test it. And the test method is not my bailiwick. That's somebody a lot smarter than me, the PhD type of people that we have at Jensen Hughes. They test the dust for explosive qualities. How explosive. First of all, is it explosive? If I put heat to it, spark a match, will it explode? And once it's determined, yes, it will, then we have to go through a process of figuring out how explosive it can be, what the maximum energy behind it is. And then if that's your process, then we have to look at your process from start to finish. And there's a couple of different ways. There's several different codes out there. There's NFPA 484, there's 652 that actually talk about dust hazard, and how to deal with dust. So there is what we call in the industry, very prescriptive code, which basically states if you follow these guidelines exactly, you should be fine. Well, the problem with that is those codes have just started to get a lot more, utilized over the last decade. And, people's dust collectors may be out there for, 30 years. That location of that dust collector may have been out there for 30 years. So the dust hazard analysis walks through, once again, from the start of the process to where the dust collector is. And if you can't do the prescriptive requirements, then that dust hazard analysis reviews all of the process and provides mitigation features all the way through. Do I need backblast dampers on my dust collector? Do I, put a venting in my dust collector with spark arresters, those kind of things, and it gives you a plan. And then we also include things like housekeeping. We look at housekeeping and like you said earlier, David, do I have, when I walk into a place that generates dust, do I look at a plant to say, oh, I look up at the ceiling and I see an inch of dust up at the ceiling because they don't want to get anybody up there? Or when we walk through a plant, do I see somebody up there, cleaning their dust with an air hose? So now basically I'm creating one huge, massive dust cloud. So there's a lot of that's involved within this dust hazard analysis. Oh, there is. I mean, even metal, people don't realize metal dust is highly explosive, aluminum, depending upon it. And dust it's hard to put a finger on it. You may look at two separate, dust and say this one isn't, but this one is because, the dust is a little bit bigger, micron size, or it's got a little more humidity. It's got a little more water content in it where, on a lot of different, factors will dictate, if the dust is explosive or if it's not explosive. Yeah, and
Interesting. Sounds like Hot Rod was onto something when I said I was going to fire the cleaning lady, but he said he was going to pay for her out of his own pocket to bring.
And that was getting back to getting done. Yeah, there you go. Getting back to your other question about some of the things that we've seen, and if anybody out there does these kind of surveys for clients that do have dust, and I had a client, and this kind of goes back to my lessons learned. I had a client that we were doing a dust hazard analysis for. So I walked through the plant, looked at the dust hazard looked at it, looked at their process. They even had their dust collector outside. They had they had the backblast dampers in so that we can isolate the rest so that if I do have an explosion within my collector, it's not going to propagate through the entire process. We're trying to isolate it to that one specific spot. And if I lose a collector, that's fine. The collector's outside of the building. The backblast damper is right before, right at the wall before it enters the building. So I'm in a good spot. So I stop that explosion from propagating throughout my processes, which is good. However, when I walked through and I looked at it, they had their dust collector venting, because the dust collectors will have, explosion vents. In the event of an explosion, those are meant to blow off. So I'm not, throwing shrapnel everywhere. They had that like right next. They put a picnic table right next, a picnic table and break area right next to where if there was an explosion, this panel would have just taken out this entire picnic table. So if people were sitting there, so just simple things like that people generally don't think about. We did the same thing for another client who had indoor dust collectors that had flame arresters and they had venting on them. They were fairly small, but they could still present a problem. So they had put in explosion-proof venting with flame arresters. So if I did have a pressure release with inside of that vessel, it would controlled release the pressure, and then arrest the flame arrestor would make sure I'm not having the flamethrower effect and I'm shooting flames everywhere. But like anything else, it does have a safe distance because you're still venting you're still venting a vessel that has pressure in it. So you're going to have some pressure. Where they actually put this this pressure relief valve and flame arrestor right next to a major walkway where people were walking past. So we just had them reroute the path, to a safe distance away. So those are just, getting back to that last comment you had said about what some of the things we normally see, that from and the other one we hit on already was just housekeeping. Do we have a 3-inch layer of dust everywhere when you start walking into an area that has some sort of processes that create that dust?
Yeah, I mean, it really never ends, man. Part of it has to do with this. Open your eyes and look. I mean, try and look at things through an objective lens. And, the phenomenon that happens is common. If you come over to my house, Mark, you walk in for dinner and you look left and right, you're going to see every dusty corner that exists in my home because I live there every day and I've over time become blind to it. And you're not, you're not blind to it because you just came over. And so this is why I'm such a huge proponent, specifically when it comes to things like housekeeping and preventive maintenance, that companies have a formal process in place and that they actually execute on it. It's not the old employee handbook where we're doing it because the attorney said we should have one and we're going to hand one out and make you sign that you got it and that you read it and you understand it, nod, nod, wink, wink. It needs to be set up.
Yep.
It needs to be executed. There needs to be accountability. You need to have people that are responsible for that sign off that they've actually done it so that you can hold them accountable for it. And then it needs to be constantly reviewed to make sure that whatever you originally started out doing is actually adequate for what you're doing now. Here again, another fun fact. Companies change over time. Manufacturing facilities start manufacturing things they didn't manufacture 5 years ago. And if you don't take the time to look at this stuff and adjust as you go, you're toast. Yep. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We are coming up on time, but listen, I really want I want you to take a second. The whole thing's kind of been a shameless plug, but I'm the one who orchestrated it, so not really. But I want people to be able to know how to get a hold of you, because I really think that this is why I was adamant when I talked to Steve and found out that he was no longer at his predecessor. It's why I wanted to get somebody from Jensen Hughes on the podcast, because what you guys do is extremely important. If you're selling mom and pop restaurants and retail candle shops and strip malls, you're not gonna need these guys. This isn't what you do. You're gonna put them on a business owner's policy and call it a day. But for those of you that are serious about the middle market and you want to know the types of tools that we have at our disposal, as long as we're willing to use them to invest in bringing good accounts onto our book, guys like Mark and companies like Jensen Hughes are paramount in that process. And if nothing else, what you've learned from this last 45, 50 minutes that we've been talking, David ain't a one-trick pony when it comes to workers' comp. I know about this. And I can use it at the drop of a hat if I need to. So, Mark, you got the floor. Tell them how to find you, Jensen Hughes, whoever you want them to get in touch with if they need to use you guys.
Well, the easiest way, we're a large global company. We have offices throughout the United States, Europe and, Middle East. So we're a large global company. Probably the easiest way is just going to our website. I mean, I could give out phone numbers and things like that, but depending upon where you're at, we have a comprehensive website that has information, on this particular offices in all the different areas of the United States. It has a list of, the experts in different fields, and it also has an inquiry page. So if you're, calling or, inquiring about something in particular, you can just hit the contact us, tab and, type in your question, and then it'll be routed to the right person, to the appropriate person. So that's just very simple. It's just our website, which is all one word. It's just jensenhughes.com. JensenHughes.com. Very simple. And then it can direct you. Like I said, it's a very, it'll direct you. It's very intuitive and very, user friendly. Yeah.
Sweet.
Good deal. Well, listen, man, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I could talk about this stuff
I could too.
For a long time, and you could talk for even longer, I'm sure. But this is the stuff that our industry needs, man. The Main Street and the independent agency channel needs to understand, why companies that are global companies in terms of brokerages and otherwise win, and why what they do to get larger accounts. And I hear the story all the time. Oh, well, they're old college buddies, or they put them on the private jet and took them to a ball game or whatever else. That's bullcrap. What gets business done is providing a solution to a problem that your client didn't know they have before they talk to you. And this is a great example of that. With that, I'm going to end it. I really appreciate you coming on today, Mark. look forward to getting to continue dialogue with you in the future. I know you guys are, maybe not you personally, but I know you guys will be doing business for Florida Risk Partners, and I trust that other people have learned some things from this podcast that they can take out and make a positive impact, not just on their financial situation, but on the landscape of their clients and their book of business.
And I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks,
absolutely.
Mark. See you.
You've been listening to the Power Producers Podcast. You can follow Killing Commercial Insurance on Facebook and YouTube. And if you want to take your game to the next level, check out our book, The Extra 2 Minutes, and our website, killingcommercial.com.